So we consider ourselves a Celtic band for the most part, meaning that our material comes mostly from Ireland, Scotland, a little bit of Cape Breton and Nova Scotia area. And I play the fiddle, and I sing and play some rhythm guitar.
I play guitar myself, rhythm and lead.
And I play upright bass and do some singing, some background stuff.
Most of these tunes come from the British Isles, primarily Ireland, but we also play a lot of music from Scotland, and that made its way here over the last few centuries to New England, where it became a huge part of New England's folk music as well. It sort of blended once it got here. The Irish and the Scottish immigrants met and befriended and played music with the French Canadian folks who had come down from the north, which in many cases that area was settled. Nova Scotia area was settled by Scots themselves. So you get all these different sort of subgenres of Celtic music that came together and blended with the addition of more Quebecois and French Canadian style music into what we loosely think of today as sort of the New England style of traditional music. And our music, we tend to lean more on the Celtic side of that, the Irish and Scottish side, and then we also mix in a fair amount of our own compositions that are oftentimes written sort of in that vibe. That's one of the really exciting things about this style of music, is that it is so historical. We're sitting in front of Folsom Tavern, which was built in 1775, and I can guarantee you that a lot of the songs that they would have played in this tavern are the same songs that are part of this tradition today and part of our repertoire. So yes, absolutely, the historical element of this is one of the things that drew me to it originally, and a lot of the very same material that we're playing now is the same material that would have been played centuries ago. The degree to which traditional music has changed over time is sort of a hotly debated topic within the traditional music world. There are music preservationists whose goal is to, not to use the term in its own definition, but to preserve music exactly the way it was played hundreds of years ago. They're essentially historians who are trying to replicate exactly what you might have heard in a place like Folsom Tavern. So that being said, that's not what we are. We're not music preservationists so much as we are performers in this genre. We tend to think of this music as kind of a living, breathing, current thing that one can engage with and enjoy, separate from its historical context. And that's the way a lot of my musical heroes approached it. The people that I listened to and tried to emulate growing up, whether that be Natalie McMaster from the Cape Breton tradition, or Alistair Fraser from the Scottish tradition, Martin Hayes from the Irish tradition, and many others. One of the things that sets those musicians apart is that they are very heavily steeped in this old music, but they're not just repeating it. They are engaging with it and reinterpreting it and putting their own personal creativity into it, and that's keeping it relevant and interesting in a way. Not to say that it's not interesting by itself, but in my personal taste for this music, that's much more what I'm interested in doing, is performing this and engaging with it. It's something that I've always done, but then certainly once I started working with these guys, that's something that we've moved toward even more, is playing with the music, having fun with it, exploring it, and that means sometimes changing some things around in exactly the same way that it would have been played with and changed around historically. It wasn't always historical music to be preserved. That at a certain point it was just the music people were playing, and since it was an oral tradition, not written down but passed along from fiddler to fiddler, it was always being explored and reinterpreted. And that's one of the things that made it feel alive back then, and that's what we try to do with it as well.
We're all sort of lifelong musicians. Like I met Matt for the first time in high school band, and we've all sort of developed in different ways. I went to music school, UNH music school, and now I'm an orchestra teacher. But I've always kind of been in bands outside of that and sort of done the live music thing. And I know me and Matt were in a band together since high school. We've been in different groups together. We don't ever think of not doing music. We're never going to retire from this per se. So we just always try to get a little bit better each and every time.
Yeah, I mean, music for me is about the same. It's just something I love to do, and it's something I'll do until the day I die. I went to school for music as well. I went to UMass Lowell. and found myself back up in New Hampshire. This is originally where I grew up, and since high school I've played with Chris, and since college I've played with Jordan and continued to play with Chris, and just continuing to do it to this day because it's something I love to do, and don't ever plan on stopping.
In the Celtic music world, you'll find musicians that are sort of independent musicians that hire in an assortment of different accompanists to play with them. It's one of the great things about this tradition is that there's so much shared repertoire that it's possible to actually play concerts with people you've never met before, and that can be great. However, there are obvious limitations to that, and I was starting to get to a point where I wanted to try to put something together that was going to be a little more polished and a little more rehearsed than that. And I happened to be working with these guys in another project and was discovering not only their musical talent, but they were pretty fun guys to be around. So I put out the offer to start learning some Celtic music and maybe start picking up some gigs. And what began as kind of a side project has become sort of a main thing for all of us.
Yeah, and I'd say that before I met Jordan, I had never really played Irish music at all. It was definitely something pretty foreign to me, so it was definitely a learning curve for both me and Matt when we first joined the group. We had charts for a bunch of these songs and whatnot, and I feel like we've all really gotten to know sort of the typical parts of Irish music and what makes it, and explore different tunes. I know personally I play the upright bass, and traditionally that's not really an instrument that is involved in Irish music. And we sort of added in to give it a little bit more of a modern sound, so that when you see us live, we're adding in that sort of low end, and that sort of completes it and makes it a little bit more like what you would hear from a bunch of different styles of music have that bass, so the listeners are kind of used to it, and so that it kind of makes it a little bit more accessible, I think, for them. They can kind of relate it to the different styles that they know, and then hopefully we make some new fans out of it.
Exactly, that accessibility is a big thing. It's one of the reasons that we get hired to do a lot of sort of public, general public concerts, like little town gazebo concerts, which typically might be, you're a cover band or something like that, and sometimes we get pulled in, even though we're, this sort of niche market of Celtic music. We get pulled in because of that, I think, sort of general public accessibility. And then what we're doing is introducing traditional music to the general public that way, and sort of, as Chris said, hopefully, winning some people over toward the traditional scene.